At 09:23 hours on June 14th, 2025, the USS Princeton was on a routine freedom of navigation patrol in the South China Sea when its spy radar revealed an object that could have ignited a global war. A Chinese Type 052D destroyer, which had been shadowing from 200 kilometers, abruptly accelerated from 18 to 30 knots in less than 90 seconds. Unbeknownst to the Americans, the Zhongchong's captain had just been ordered from Beijing to intercept the U.S. ship and force it to back down. Beijing, however, was about to discover why directly confronting the U.S. Navy on the high seas is a remarkably bad idea. The Nimitz carrier strike group shown here had spent 75 years doing what American sailors do best, keeping the planet's vital sea lanes open so Chinese factories could ferry their cheap gadgets to stores. They were 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese shore, operating in international waters where roughly $3.4 trillion in commerce circulates each year. The strike group's assignment was classic freedom of navigation: steady course, open intentions, and professional behavior that distinguishes established navies from loose maritime mobs. At 09:26, the target was classified. Radar crews had positively identified a Chinese Type 052D destroyer and rated the threat as moderate to high. Inside Princeton's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer tracked the destroyer's vector with the composed assurance that comes from commanding 122 vertical launch cells loaded with enough ordnance to make any opposing ship vanish beneath the waves. The spy radar, the world's most capable naval sensor, rendered an image so precise you could pick out every feature of the opposing vessel. At the destroyer's present speed, it would reach weapons engagement range in exactly 17 minutes. The arithmetic was simple and grim for the Chinese. Their YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could close the gap in under 4 minutes once fired, while Princeton's SM-6s in surface mode could reach roughly 240 nautical miles and knock those missiles down like insects. At 09:29, the captain asked for the likely intent of the Chinese ship. The result was plain. On its current course and speed, it would be within weapons release distance in 14 minutes. The advised action was to sound general quarters. The captain, however, answered with textbook American swagger. Let them show how badly they want to humiliate themselves first. That was assuming they could even arrive without exposing themselves. The South China Sea was crowded with commercial traffic, 46 merchant vessels within 50 miles, all relying on the U.S. Navy's presence to keep transits safe. A Singapore-flagged container ship full of semiconductors, a South Korean LNG tanker valued at $200 million. All of these would be endangered if Beijing managed to turn international waters into its exclusive pool. But accomplishing that would require defeating the U.S. Navy, an outcome that has never occurred. At 09:30, Princeton's cooperative engagement capability automatically broadcast the threat picture across the strike group. The Nimitz herself, a 104,600-ton symbol of American power, carrying 90 of the world's most advanced aircraft, tweaked flight operations with clockwork precision. Destroyers, Chunghun and Kidd, repositioned to stations around the carrier that would make any Chinese strike a one-way voyage to the bottom and leave no wreckage, survivors, or doubt about who dominated that patch of ocean. At 09:35, the tactical scenario shifted from worrisome to outright hazardous. An E-2D Hawkeye circling at 25,000 feet, offering a near-omniscient view of everything within a 400-mile radius, picked up multiple aircraft lifting off from the Chinese carrier Shandong. Their radar signatures matched J-15 fighters clawing skyward and heading south, as though they actually stood a chance. Air controllers immediately caught a detail almost comedic. The J-15s were struggling to climb, hampered by the limited fuel loads forced on them by the ski-jump launch system the Chinese boasted about so often. Barely a minute later, sonar operators contributed another piece to China's ill-fitted puzzle. A possible submerged contact detected 80 nautical miles out. The acoustic profile indicated a Type 039 diesel-electric submarine. The absurd part. It was so noisy it sounded like a cargo train rumbling through a tunnel. Any competent submarine crew would have been ashamed. China wasn't just posturing aggressively, it was attempting a multi-domain intimidation play with machinery that looked better suited to a museum. Surface vessels from the 1990s. Carrier aircraft that couldn't launch with full payloads. Submarines broadcasting their own location like an AM radio station. It was intimidation theater, the sort that only works against opponents too feeble or too timid to stand their ground. Unfortunately for Beijing, it had just provoked the wrong Navy in the wrong waters. The US Navy had been refining blue water supremacy since 1914, and these Chinese assets were about to receive a complimentary reminder of why America's fleet has no peer. By 0937, the USS Nimitz's flight deck erupted in the orchestrated chaos only American carriers have perfected. FA-18E Super Hornets from VFA-14 Top Hatters thundered off catapults every 45 seconds. It was a choreographed display the Chinese ski-jump carriers could only envy. Steam hissed from catapult tracks as US naval aviation did what it was built for, projecting power. The lead division of Hornets climbed through 15,000 feet, their AN/APG-79 AESA radar already illuminating J-15 at maximum detection range. The mismatch in capability was almost cruel. The APG-79, with its 1,000-plus transmit-receive modules, could track dozens of contacts simultaneously, while the J-15's mechanically scanned radar swept back and forth like a searchlight, practically shouting its location. The Chinese fighters strained for altitude, a humiliating reminder of their ski-jump handicap. Without catapults, they launched underfueled and underarmed, climbing steeply to gain energy while burning fuel faster. In contrast, the American Hornets launched fully loaded, with surplus fuel and carried weapons rated E for everyone. And that was just the advantage visible to Chinese eyes. Every F/A-18 was tied into Link 16, a secure data network sharing sensor input in real time. What one aircraft detected, all detected. The Chinese, meanwhile, relied on radio chatter and individual radars, like fighting a networked team while blindfolded. The technology gap wasn't measured in years, but in decades. Then, the EA-18G Growlers joined the dance without releasing a missile. Outfitted with ALQ-99 jamming pods, they could disrupt enemy systems from 100 miles away. As their jamming orbits settled in, Chinese communications fractured. On their scopes, phantom contacts multiplied. American fighters flickered in and out, splitting and merging. 4 Hornets appeared as 12, then 20. Radar locks broke, reformed, and vanished. J-15 pilots found themselves dueling ghosts, while the real threats maneuvered invisibly. The Americans employed a tactical spread known as the Wall, a formation refined over decades. High cover at 35,000 feet, medium at 25,000, and low at 15,000. Overlapping weapon zones, mutual support, and no escape corridor. The Chinese were caught in a layered vice 3 times over. Meanwhile, their own formation clung together in a tight cluster, forced by the reality that their data links couldn't support dispersed operations. A glaring weakness laid bare against a navy that had mastered distributed lethality generations ago. The J-15s might project strength, but in reality, they were outdated machines facing opponents armed with 21st century systems. At 0943, the RC-135B rivet joint provided pivotal intelligence. This ungainly Boeing 707 derivative had been circling for 6 hours, its electronic suites recording every Chinese transmission. The Mandarin linguists on board were practically amused. Darkstar confirms Chinese pilots requesting clearance for aggressive maneuvers. Repeating, they're asking permission to buzz our ships. Escalation, yes, but with bureaucracy attached. To American aviators, trained to act instantly, it was laughable. By the time Beijing authorized anything, the tactical picture would have shifted 3 times. Meanwhile, Princeton's defenses monitored threats with relentless accuracy. Its spy radar, capable of tracking baseball-sized objects at over 165 miles, rendered the Chinese destroyer as broad as a barn. Fire control solutions updated constantly, ready if needed. At 0947, the Zhonang crossed a line that most navies would consider an immediate act of war. Its Type 346A phased array radar stopped searching and locked onto USS Nimitz with fire control precision. In naval terms, it was the electronic equivalent of aiming a loaded weapon point blank. Inside Princeton's CIC, the reaction was immediate, but anchored in discipline drilled through endless exercises. The Chinese wagered that U.S. restraint would hold against their provocation. What they ignored was that restraint does not equal weakness. Princeton's fire control radars stayed on standby, though her 122 vertical launch cells held enough ordnance to erase the John Chong in seconds. SM-6s with a reach of 240 kilometers and SM-2s ready in surface mode stood waiting, any one of them capable of making the ship an artificial reef. Target solutions were constantly updated, surrounding the destroyer with overlapping kill zones, leaving no chance of survival if escalation turned kinetic. The Chinese fire control lock lasted exactly 30 seconds. Princeton's crew logged every detail: timestamps, signal profiles, bearing data, information that would prove invaluable in real combat. Though the Chinese radar cut off, the standoff wasn't finished. In the skies, one J-15 pilot attempted his own show of bravado. Breaking from formation, he dove at an F/A-18 in what fighter pilots call a thump, a close, aggressive pass designed to intimidate. The American, a Top Gun graduate, handled it with ease. He rolled inverted, pulled into the J-15's 6 o'clock, and for 3 seconds held a flawless firing solution. His helmet-mounted sight lit up with the Chinese jet's glowing engines. One squeeze of the trigger and an AIM-9X Sidewinder would have raced up the J-15's exhaust. He didn't pull. Discipline prevailed. The moment passed. Yet the Chinese had one last card. Their submarine finally moved. The Type 039 diesel-electric boat had been edging closer under cover of the thermal layer. At 0951, it made a fatal mistake, raising its snorkel to recharge batteries. Tao, sonar reports subsurface contact, bearing 159, range 15,000 yards. Contact is snorkeling. Classified probable Type 039. The trap was exposed. He was making the kind of racket you'd expect from a freight train. The submarine's captain either had no clue or no concern that Princeton's SQ-89 sonar suite had been tracking him relentlessly for the last hour. His acoustic profile was logged, his location pinned within meters. If things turned hot, he'd have maybe 12 seconds to reflect on his career before an ASROC converted his vessel into chum. The entire tactical setup had become a case study in what not to do in naval warfare. The Chinese had boxed themselves in, carrier to the northwest, destroyer to the west, submarine lurking southwest.